It's at this point where decades of paralysis and division might become secondary, where the people might recognize their existential threat, and they might agree to set aside their differences, provided someone successfully reminds them of the one thing they have in common.
The one thing we have in common indeed. Very important to know that and to all work together. So this beautiful and articulate lady, I've featured her before, some of her clips, and she's fantastic. And what she's put together here is a thing of beauty indeed. So it's around 20 minutes and it just flows like honey. And it describes all of what we're going through under the context of how empires like ours actually fail. And it's because insidious elements get in through the back door and take us down, deconstruct us. So it's a fantastic listen, and I'll catch you at the far side. And I'm going to go through a very short bit of Tragedy and Hope 101 from Joe Plummer, a little piece of his free audiobook, and I'll make some comments because it's very salient to what this lady has to say.
This is how to destroy an empire. You can't just destroy an empire. An empire in its golden age is a fortress. It spans large swaths of land. It has economic supremacy, cultural supremacy, military supremacy. It dictates laws, standards, rules, norms, moral codes, belief systems, even trends and innovations to its constellation of territories and allies, all of whom are loyal to, or at the very least dependent on its dominion. The empire has the perfect combination of internal cohesion and external projection, which is the symbiosis that makes it untouchable. Empires are built to last generations. They're built to beat down invasions. They are built to endure. And yet, empires fall. All of them, in fact. Every empire at one point thought it would last forever. No empire ever did. It's very reasonable to assume that any empire will end at some point. This process can be invisible for a long time and it can take centuries. But what would you do if, for whatever reason, you wanted to speed up that decline? You won't destroy an empire by shooting arrows at the gate. The only way to destroy an empire is from within. Step 1. Wait. Yeah, you don't actually need to do anything. That's because the empire will execute step 1 for you. A famous essay by Sir John Glubb posits that every empire in history follows the same 6 stages. The 6th and final stage in this theory is called the Age of Decadence. Around the mid-8th to 9th century, the Abbasid dynasty oversaw the Islamic Golden Age and brought the center of power and the center of knowledge to Baghdad. Trade, tribute, and tax revenue along the Silk Roads brought wealth, and in the House of Wisdom, scholars translated texts and practiced mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The empire splurged on luxuries, in part to uphold a reputation, in part because it could. Elites competed for influence, and the court culture inspired tales from 1001 Nights. And at some point, prosperity turned into luxury, investment turned into spending, and intellect turned into hubris. This is a pattern we can find echoed across millennia. All sorts of empires fell into the same trap, and the reason why is both simple and discouraging. Psychology. A behavior that's wired into the human condition. We just can't help it. An early analysis of empires comes from Ibn Khaldun in 1377, who argued that empires grow because of a disciplined frontier tribe, and empires decay because prosperity creates luxury, and luxury weakens character. The first generation retains the desert qualities, desert toughness, and desert savagery. Under a life of ease, the second generation changes from the desert attitude to sedentary culture, and from privation to luxury and plenty. The third generation then has completely forgotten the period of desert life and toughness. It is in the fourth generation that ancestral prestige is destroyed. We humans have this pesky tendency to repeat the mistakes of our ancestors, even when we know the outcome. Worse yet, we usually do it while being fully convinced that something like that could never happen to us. The first thing the empire loses is ambition. At the top of the world, the urgency is gradually sucked from the empire. It transitions from a force for conquest into a creature of comfort. And rather than dealing with big existential issues, its people now have the time and privilege to focus on smaller matters. First world problems, if you will. As it launches atop the world, thinking itself untouchable, it becomes comfortable, content, complacent. Step 2. Bloat the empire. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. The dangerous thing about decay is that it sneaks up on you. Every step of the way, destructive measures might look entirely logical. First world problems are great. They're great for the empire because they mean there's no real problems, but they're great for you because they give you an opening to make your first move. It's hard to oversee massive territories. You're gonna help the empire install some processes to maintain order. Put in place systems to handle recurring matters, regulations to keep things in check, licenses to moderate new things, committees to review those new things, institutions to monitor all the things. In short, you're going to create a massive bureaucracy. All that means a greater administrative burden, and things are going to run a little more slowly than they used to, but such is the price of stability. You can't run an empire like a startup. Keep the empire focused on its small problems. After all, first world problems are problems too. It'll become great at regulating daily life, and slowly it will lose the ability to deal with a real crisis. There's no reason to worry though, because the empire has no real crisis to deal with. But if you, say, wanted to sufficiently handicap the empire to ensure it would become too sluggish to react to internal threats that might arise in the future, well, that's how you do it. Step 3. Eradicate meaning. What makes an empire great? A great empire is the sum of the greatness of its people. Now, greatness necessitates the pursuit of purpose. A great leader makes his people feel invested in the success of the empire because they find personal meaning in its dominion. While many elements make up the whole, we can pinpoint a few that hold the population together like none other, and that's faith, family, and a common identity. Faith provides us answers to the unanswerable, a shared moral code, a recipe for the virtuous life, and a window into the infinite. Family provides us a safety net, love, a promise of continuity and the longevity of our values. A common identity, be it national or transnational, shields and preserves these values and gives us something worth protecting together. The Roman Empire first cultivated polytheism and later Christianity. Marriage, inheritance, and ancestor veneration were held in high regard. Men were to safeguard the family, just as citizens were to safeguard the state. Civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, was the ultimate sense of belonging. The Islamic dynasties practiced Islam, obviously, considered the family the foundation of moral and social order, and spread their language, culture, and teachings across the empire. The Western Empire most strongly upheld its values in the decades following World War II, which elevated the West into the dominant superpower and the epitome of individual liberty. Christianity permeated the empire, the nuclear family was idealized, the West and its allies became the first world, English the world language, and for all of us alive today, throughout most of our memory, the West sat at the top of the world. Meaning gives structure. To destroy the empire, destroy meaning. But how do you subvert such fundamental values of a population? You're going to gain access to the empire's communication and information channels. State institutions, its schools, mainstream media. At this point, you don't shape public opinion by putting a politician on stage. You shape it subconsciously. You're going to channel your messaging into the empire, without anyone noticing, over the span of decades. Of course, it's basically impossible to gain control of the media, communication channels, and school curricula across several countries.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Basically undoable, right? Weaken faith. Faith is stronger where needs are greater. The wealthy empire, where all needs are met and the desire for divine intervention naturally decreases, gives you an opening. Turn faith from a fundamental principle into a private pastime. Lower it from its pedestal, make it optional, a preference of the older generation, and offer alternatives to the younger ones. Juxtapose the teachings of religions with the findings of science. Present science as the enlightened choice, source of provable answers. And natural scientists become the most respected intellectuals. Just be careful not to mention that some of the world's greatest scientists were stern believers in God. Question the inhibiting teachings of religion. Make it something regressive, the antithesis to freedom. As public opinion shifts away from faith, it also shifts from the moral code anchored within faith, and our morality is basically pulled from under our feet. Once that happens, you'd be surprised how quickly morality becomes malleable. Fragment the family. The concept of family was never meant to be political, but today it is. Why is that? The family is definitionally crucial to the continuation of the empire. No babies, no people, no empire. Because of that, and for evolutionary reasons, the empire celebrates the family unit and shields it. But what if Disney princesses suddenly become girl bosses? See, the empire should support any path its people, including its women, might choose. But what if it supports one path more than the other? Is that still support, or is that conditioning? Heroes in movies become heroines. Rather than pregnant Disney princesses, tell stories of rebellious warrior women. Schools teach girls not to celebrate their feminine strength, but that strength is inherently masculine, and that to be strong, they need to be like boys. Motherhood then becomes something mundane. Anyone can make babies, but who can run a startup? You'll direct loyalty from the family to the workplace. Girls grow up learning, strong women don't need a man. Erase identity. Growing nations and empires always steer their people towards the things that unite them. For a nation, that would be things like language, tradition, culture. Just like we're proud when our sports team wins the World Cup, we're proud when our nation does well. For an empire, the unifying factors would be deeper things like a shared moral code, philosophy, or governance system. So how could identity become such a touchy subject? Maybe because someone like you showed up and questioned the very morality of national identity. Someone who asks, why are you proud of your culture? Were you born is no achievement. Someone who casts doubt over the very history of the empire, removes its heroes from the curriculum, tells not the stories of its success, but cautionary tales of ruthlessness in its past. How can you be proud of your culture when your ancestors did bad things? Few things accelerate the decline of the empire, like convincing its people that they don't deserve their spot at the top of the world, that they in fact ought to apologize for their identity, better yet find a new one. When you take away the people's sense of belonging, you have to replace it with something else. And that's exactly what you're going to do. Enter hyper-individualism. One of our many human traits is our gravitation towards community. Which is to say, if you don't act quickly, the people of the empire will regroup. But you want to keep them fragmented. You want to divide and conquer. Economic differences, cultural differences, biological differences, religious differences, normal differences that can actually complement each other, unless someone, like you, makes them irreconcilable. Weaponize differences as symptoms of inequality. Everyone is special. Being normal is no good. Elevate niche subcultures over the mainstream. Make identity something fluid, something political. People will begin to measure their differences by degree of privilege. The empire now faces a dilemma. People demand fair treatment, but that means different things to different people. And in its impossible pursuit of equality, the empire necessarily sacrifices excellence. Step 4. Open the gates. A large empire naturally harbors many different peoples and cultures, much like the Abbasid dynasty during the Islamic Golden Age, heart of global trade and home to all kinds of people. This works so long as order is maintained. It stops working when one fragments the population from within, sort of like you've been doing for a few decades now. Remember what we said at the beginning? You can't destroy an empire by charging at the front gates. But what if the gates are opened from the inside? What if, out of manufactured guilt, the empire simply drops its defenses? From the 9th century onwards, the Abbasids increasingly brought in specially trained Turkic soldiers as elite guards, for several reasons, but one of them was that the local guards were considered politically unreliable and factionalized. Meanwhile, the Turkic soldiers didn't concern themselves with the local politics, and so they were deemed immune to court conspiracies. But that also meant they held no real loyalty to the court or its culture. The Abbasids underestimated both the number of Turkic soldiers they needed and their cohesion as a group, and at one point the Turkic guards realized they could simply kill caliphs they didn't like and install new ones. They could seize power from the empire, which was already too internally fragmented to defend itself. While the Turkic soldiers were not directly responsible for the eventual downfall of the Abbasid Empire, and that was the Mongols, they further weakened an already fragmented realm. Basically, they made things worse. If the integrity of the empire is intact, then a controlled mingling of peoples and cultures poses no threat. But it takes no genius to understand what happens if you first fragment the empire on the inside and then open the gates for anyone to come in and wreak havoc. Step 5. Install puppet leaders. So far, you have bloated the empire, you've slowed its reaction times, you've loosened the strings that hold it together through subversive messaging. Those methods are effective but take time. But there comes a point in the decay of an empire where trust in leadership necessarily falters. This is the point where you step up to actually rule. Which is to say, you won't put your face on display, that's not your job. You'll forever be in the shadows, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. What you need is someone to do your bidding, someone malleable, a puppet leader. An exhausted society becomes governable by whoever promises stability, and that's you. Never mind that you actually helped create the instability in the first place. They don't know that. They don't know you. You'll give the people what they think they want. A perfect candidate. Good enough to collect votes, but not good enough to rule. A demagogue who says things people want to hear, regardless of whether it's actually conducive to anything. He's going to force his opponents to make similar outrageous promises or risk almost certain defeat in the next election. Politics now becomes a popularity contest. If done well, you don't need to force your puppet leader onto the people. You can simply fake his legitimacy. Front pages, scripted interviews, cameos, staged rallies, PR, left, right, and center. It's not too hard to install a puppet leader if you control the media. You should of course pick your puppet leader well. It should be someone predictable, someone who depends on you, someone who becomes utterly powerless if you cut funding from NGOs, foundations, and donors. So long as you get your puppet leader elected, you're good. Then you just handpick his advisors who make the actual decisions behind the scenes. Rinse and repeat. Congratulations, you now influence governance. Step 6. Shatter the economy. A couple generations have passed in the empire. The younger citizens simply don't remember the olden days, and they're certainly not learning about it at school. They had no share in the days of prosperity. All they've inherited is economic hardship and political polarization. By now, the empire feels the consequences of your actions, like low birth rates, or leaders who spend the treasury like there's no tomorrow. These things put an economic strain on the empire. The empire's currency gradually devalues and becomes less desirable for foreign trade. Life becomes less and less affordable. Mind you, the empire has an incredibly strong economy that can certainly handle some setbacks. Empires, especially long-lasting ones, will always go through ups and downs. What's important is that they retain their spot at the top of the world. Where it gets dangerous is if a competitor for the throne arises precisely when the empire stumbles. Now that would be very unfortunate. What damage could such a competitor do? Well, he could start chipping away at the edges of the imperial territory by luring factions into his own structures, build trade routes, offer investment, expand his indirect influence in the empire's realm, fracture economic loyalty to the empire. Step 7. Move the red line. We've talked about the erosion of meaning, but how about eroding definitions altogether? Most of us don't realize the destructive power of vagueness. Order is built on predictability. Let's look at the red line. Red lines frame the society of the empire and define the thresholds of acceptable conduct. A red line can be a law, or it can be a cultural or societal code. Different societies lay their red lines in different places. That's why in some countries there's capital punishment, while in others there isn't. It's why Singapore will punish you very harshly for drug offenses that the Netherlands might not even prosecute. How the red lines are defined is less important than that they are defined, as it is by their virtue that a society maintains order. But what if you move the red lines? What if, in fact, you keep moving them until they disappear entirely? Let's look at an example. One of the empire's red lines is do not steal. Theft is incompatible with a high-trust society. That's a clearly defined red line. Take something that isn't yours, you'll face punishment. Now, you can't just barge in and say, you may now steal. The empire may be divided, but it's not an empire of savages. Though you will be surprised how far you can move this red line. Actually, maybe you won't be surprised at all. Put the absolute into perspective. Ask a reasonable question. Stealing is bad, but what if you steal because you're starving? Can we really treat a father who stole to feed his hungry family the same as a greedy robber? Appeal to empathy. Make morality conditional. Remember, you removed the basis of people's moral code, so this won't be too hard. Compassion creates a crack in the absolute, and you can now move the red line, even if just an inch, from do not steal to do not steal unless you're starving and it's bread. Shift blame. Once the red line becomes circumstantial, you can argue that thieves don't steal for the fun of it. They steal because they have no other choice. The father who stole to feed his family is no longer just a perpetrator, he's a victim of a broken system. Consequently, simply going after thieves does little more than treat the symptoms of an underlying disease, and it's better to focus on the cause instead, which is inequality. By moralizing the motivations of thieves, you imply that their very prosecution might be immoral. Rationalize the undefined. You've declared some theft as acceptable, and so crime inevitably rises. But hunting down all those thieves costs money, taxpayer money, and resources which are needed to go after actual criminals. Is it really worth jailing a thief who stole $1,000 worth, if doing so costs tens of thousands of dollars a year? Shouldn't you prioritize those who pose a real danger to society? Not to mention the risk of prison overcrowding. More often than not, one who walks into jail a pickpocket comes out a hardened criminal. And who wants that? The red line moves again. From do not steal unless you're hungry and it's bread, to there are bigger problems than theft. This gives you enough room to cash in your gains, say with a law that lowers the penalties for low-value theft, maybe a law that allows you to steal up to $950 worth of goods without serious repercussions. After all, that makes the justice system more efficient, right? The empire builds a tolerance for theft. The people of the empire don't. Gaslight. You've made thieves into victims, theft judicially irrelevant, and the prosecution of small-time offenses morally reprehensible. Police will stop pursuing low-threshold theft, and prosecutors will reject low-value cases. The cityscape changes. Stores lock up products behind glass. Some board up the windows. Others can't absorb the losses and close down. Trust in each other and trust in law enforcement is largely eroded. The empire cultivates mercy to the guilty at the expense of the innocent. Red lines serve a purpose. Once you take away the ability to define rules and morals, you take away the ability to enforce order. And without order, it's only a matter of time until your society collapses. Step 8. Beware the great man. Checking in on the empire, it's a fragmented mess. And the world has begun to notice. Since you began your quest, decades have passed, and technology has evolved. It could be, for example, that your monopoly on truth has been dissolved by, the rise of social media. It's no longer as easy to plant narratives. Anybody can now share information with the world, and you've lost one of your main tools for mass control. But not to worry, while you might no longer be able to dictate opinion, you can still distort it by flooding the court of public opinion and further radicalizing the fronts. And actually, social media algorithms will help you with this. People will know what you're doing, but by now they'll be too divided to attack you, too busy attacking each other. That doesn't mean you're out of the woods, though. In fact, it's at this point that you might just fail if you're not careful. Because if the people are lucky, then the decay of the empire will birth your ultimate antagonist. An empire on the verge of collapse is by no means doomed to fail. It's at this point where decades of paralysis and division might become secondary, where the people might recognize their existential threat, and they might agree to set aside their differences, provided someone successfully reminds them of the one thing they have in common, the desire for rescue. And this is great man theory. A great man is truly the last thing you want right now, a capable leader with the ability to channel decades of frustrations against your system. Yeah, if you're not careful, someone's going to actually fix the empire. This has happened before. The Roman Empire nearly collapsed during the crisis of the 3rd century. 50 years of invasions, plagues, economic freefall, fracturing borders, unstable leadership, an undisciplined army, assassinations of emperors left and right. In 270, Aurelian became emperor, and he actually managed to do the unthinkable. He defeated several enemy forces at the borders and reasserted Rome's territorial control. He purged corrupt military factions and restored discipline, introduced new coinage, and addressed inflation. His work paved the way for another emperor, Diocletian, which is another lucky coincidence because having so many capable leaders so close together, chronologically and geographically, well, that's really something. Anyway, Diocletian's reforms built on Aurelian's rescue mission, which some argue extended the lifespan of the empire by years. Some even say centuries, and some even say over a millennium. Now, this sort of comes down to your philosophy. All of which is to say, it is possible to bring an empire back from the abyss. What it takes is a capable leader, and those are really rare, but they will come about every other century or so. We also call this the great man theory of history, but that's a topic for another day. All you need to know at this point is that you should pray you don't run into an actual great man, because it'll really ruin your day. That said, great men are very rare. And if none emerges from the chaos, if in fact the opposite happens, and the empire faces competitors for the throne amidst insurmountable internal division, then you've reached the final stage of your operation. Step 9. Wait. Again. The first and last step of your plan are identical. let things run their course. The empire, the impenetrable fortress, first lost its ambition, then its meaning, then its unity, and finally its spot at the top of the world. An empire doesn't just collapse. See, even you had to wait for the empire to give you an opening. And even you had to spend decades trying to accelerate the demise. Would this have happened without your input? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly not like this, and certainly not this quickly. And at any point in time, it's quite likely that the empire could have turned things around with proper leadership that unites its people. Empires fall for a long time, and it'll take years more for the empire's territory to fragment and the last of its influence to decay. How long you need to wait, that remains to be seen. When did Rome fall? I know what you're thinking. Sounds like quite the conspiracy theory. And who would play such a long game for the destruction of an empire? And why? To install another form of power? Yeah, probably. And just to be clear, don't try and destroy any empires. Doing so will cause unimaginable harm. You'll divide peoples, destroy lives and livelihoods over generations. It would take an order of unspeakable evil to pursue such a path. Luckily, that stuff only exists in movies, right?
Whoa, fantastic, eh? Well, now we're going to look at the actual forces that have caused all of the dreadful stuff that we're experiencing at the moment and was described there by Lena. By the way, please do subscribe to her YouTube channel. Looks like she's early on her journey, and also her X account below. Just before we get into tragedy and hope, however, my app for weight loss and resilience and longevity and strength, which we're all going to need now, whether you yourself could benefit or if you could share the link, studio.com/Ivor/weight loss to someone you know who has tried and failed before and needs all the psychology and all the coaching and all the elements in this AI driven app. All my knowledge of the last 15 years in metabolism and psychology to finally get some real success. Well, maybe you could share it with one of those friends or family. But the links are down below, and that'll help me fund the new documentary I'm going to be making on tragedy and hope. So now I'm going to just give a little excerpt from Joe Plummer's free audiobook. I'll put the links down below also. And they kind of introduce you very well to what's going on here. The author, Carol Quigley, and what we're talking about, and why it's the most important book, I believe, of the past century, or it's in there, and it needs a documentary to be made about it, and that will help awareness grow much more widely. And Joe is going to get involved, and I have filmmaker friends. It's going to be great. It's going to take a while, but it's going to be cool. Just have a listen here.
Knowledge of who Carol Quigley was and the deceptions that he revealed is essential for understanding the real world of today. His close relationship with the network and his approval of its aims made it possible to provide an insider's analysis of the minds and methods of the global elite. Without this knowledge, the actions of those who dominate the U.S. government and the Western world do not make sense. With it, everything falls into place. Have you ever felt like democracy is just an illusion? Have you ever suspected that there are very powerful people who've created a system that appears to be democratic, but actually cuts ordinary citizens out of the decision-making process? Have you ever wondered who's really running things, and what exactly are they trying to achieve? If you have, you're not alone. Fortunately, a Harvard-educated history professor named Carol Quigley wrote a handful of books that answer all of these questions and more. Unfortunately, the answers are very disturbing, especially to those who've accepted the common myths of democratic government. We learn that representative government is at best a carefully managed con game. Since these disturbing truths contradict nearly everything our government, education system, and media have taught us to believe, many will immediately dismiss them as nonsense. Only wild-eyed conspiracy theorists believe such things, they will say. However, there's one big problem. Carol Quigley was no wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. Quite the contrary. Quigley was a prominent historian who specialized in studying the evolution of civilizations as well as secret societies. He studied history at Harvard University, where he earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees. He taught at Princeton University, Harvard University, and the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He worked as an advisor to the U.S. Defense Department, the U.S. Navy, and the Smithsonian Institution. In short, Carroll Quigley was a well-connected and well-credentialed member of Ivy League society. Based on his own words and his training as a historian, it appears that he was chosen by members of a secret network to write the real history of their rise to power. However, as Quigley later realized, these individuals didn't expect or intend for him to publish their secrets for the rest of the world to see. Shortly after publishing Tragedy and Hope in 1966, the network apparently made its displeasure known to Quigley's publisher, and the book he'd spent 20 years writing was pulled from the market.
Indeed. Hopefully that gives a flavour of how important this book is. Understanding the network, understanding how they operate, understanding who they are who are undermining everything in our children's futures. So the documentary is going to take a while. Hopefully you can bear with me. We're going to do it properly. That's my intention. And it should get very wide coverage because there's not going to be much inherently censorable in it, though I'm sure we'll have some of those challenges from the network. But we're going to do it in a very cleverly crafted way with lots of guests recorded on location with proper HD sound and video. And we're going to have a protagonist, a character, a young person who goes through a journey, a hero's journey, if you will, from frustration at what's going on in the world and the future of the children being destroyed, to understanding where it's coming from and a new zeal to help let people know, and then ultimately they'll have to pull their claws in. Once you get wide awareness, it don't work anymore. And that's why Tragedy and Hope from Carroll Quigley, it was emphasized by the network that they must work in secrecy. You can't have people talking and awareness growing or nothing can work for them, right? And that's why they whipped the book off the shelves. So in any case, just last reminder, my app, which hopefully it'll help in some of the financing for this documentary. It's now available on web-based as well as Apple, and I believe it's coming soon to Android. But for the moment, it's on Apple, and now as of a week or two ago, it's also on kind of web-based for laptops, etc. So hopefully you can share the link to the app for people who can benefit. And what we want is everyone getting slimmer, stronger, more resilient, healthier, and mentally stronger. A lot of psychology in the app too. So that'd be great if you can help pass it on. Thank you.